reconnaissance flights over Tokyo Bay regularly photographed the Yokosuka yard, but Shinano's construction slip was covered with camouflage netting. American naval intelligence knew Japan was building something large at Yokosuka, but they did not know what. On November 1, 1944, a B-29 bomber on reconnaissance photographed Shinano during sea trials. The photographs showed a carrier, but American analysts could not. At precisely 3:17 on the morning of November 29, 1944, Commander Joseph Enright, a seasoned officer of 34 from the Naval Academy class of 1933, peered through his periscope. Before him, a colossal warship, stretching beyond 3 football fields in length, swung into a broadside position, just 1,400 yards from his submarine. Despite his years of service, Enright had yet to confirm a single sinking. The Japanese had launched the largest warship ever constructed, and a mere 10 days later, this leviathan was traversing the very waters where Enright commanded the USS Archerfish. This immense vessel, the Supercarrier Shinano, weighed 72,000 tons and measured 872 feet, boasting a design intended to withstand an astonishing 20,000 torpedo strikes. The Archerfish, in contrast, carried a total of 24 torpedoes. Only 11 months prior, Enright's superiors had almost relegated him to shore duty. His initial patrol command had been labeled a textbook failure by other submarine captains at Midway after he allowed the carrier Shokaku to evade the USS Dace on November 15, 1943. Enright bore the weight of this failure, even requesting to be relieved of his command. He endured 6 months performing administrative tasks while other officers actively hunted enemy vessels. In September 1944, he sought another command. The Navy entrusted him with the Archerfish, a Balao-class submarine that had completed 4 patrols with limited success. This assignment represented Enright's rare second chance, a privilege seldom granted within the submarine force. Enright had taken command of the USS Dace in July 1943, a newly constructed vessel from Electric Boat Company in Groton, Connecticut. Commissioned on July 23, Enright was her inaugural commanding officer. This was the coveted assignment for any submarine officer, a brand new boat, an experienced crew, and deployment to the Pacific's most target-rich hunting grounds. The Dace departed New London in September 1943, transited the Panama Canal, and reached Pearl Harbor by October 3. Enright received his patrol orders on October 17, directing him to Japanese home waters, specifically the southeast coast of Honshu, near the approaches to Nagoya. Intelligence reports indicated heavy merchant shipping activity in this sector. The Dace commenced her first war patrol from Pearl Harbor on October 20. The patrol began promisingly. On November 7, Enright detected an unescorted large freighter within his patrol area. He skillfully maneuvered the Dace into an attacking position and launched 4 torpedoes, 3 of which found their mark. Though severely damaged, the freighter did not sink. Japanese patrol craft soon arrived, preventing Enright from delivering the finishing blows. The Dace was forced to disengage and dive deep to evade the ensuing depth charge attack. After nightfall, Enright surfaced and searched for the crippled freighter, discovering only debris and an oil slick. It was later confirmed that the freighter reached port and was repaired. Damaged but not sunk, it did not count as a kill, nor did it contribute to Enright's combat record. Then came November 15, Ultra Intelligence, the Allied code-breaking operation that provided advance warnings of Japanese ship movements, transmitted a critical message to all submarines operating near Honshu. The aircraft carrier Shokaku was departing Yokosuka, heading south at 18 knots, destination unknown. The Shokaku was one of the 6 carriers that had participated in the Pearl Harbor attack on December 7, 1941. She had been involved in nearly every major carrier engagement of the Pacific War, including Coral Sea, Eastern Solomons, and Santa Cruz. As Japan's most experienced carrier, with a veteran crew and a formidable combat history, she was a priority target. Sinking the Shokaku would be a monumental achievement for any submarine captain. Enright calculated the Shokaku's projected course, determining that the carrier would pass through the Dace's patrol area within 12 hours. Enright positioned his submarine along the most probable track, waiting at periscope depth and scanning the horizon every 5 minutes. Dawn arrived, but no carrier. Enright maintained periscope depth, aware that the carrier could be delayed, have altered course, or pass at any moment. At 8:30 hours, a lookout spotted a large warship on the horizon, 12,000 yards away. Its silhouette matched the Shokaku. This was the target. Enright began his approach. Standard doctrine for attacking a carrier dictated getting ahead of the target, submerging, waiting for the carrier to close the range, and then firing a spread of torpedoes. Enright meticulously followed this procedure. He briefly surfaced to gain speed, moved ahead of the Shokaku's anticipated course, submerged, and waited. However, the carrier did not appear where Enright expected. The Shokaku had executed a zigzag, changing course 30 degrees to port, now on a track that would pass 3,000 yards to the east of the Dace's position. This was too far for an effective torpedo shot. Enright faced two options: surface, reposition, and try again, or remain submerged and fire long-range torpedoes with a low probability of hitting. Enright chose to surface and reposition. He brought the Dace to the surface and ran at flank speed to regain an attack position, but daylight was rapidly increasing. Carrier lookouts would easily spot a surfaced submarine. Enright had minutes, not hours. At 9:40 hours, Enright was still not in an attack position. The rising sun and increasing visibility meant the Shokaku's destroyer escort would detect the Dace if she remained on the surface. Enright made his decision. He ordered the Dace to dive. The attack was aborted. The Shokaku steamed past, untouched, unaware that an American submarine had been tracking her for 3 hours. Enright remained submerged until dark. He surfaced and searched for the Shokaku, but the carrier was gone, vanishing into the vast Pacific. Enright radioed his patrol report to headquarters. Shokaku contact made. Attack aborted due to unfavorable geometry and approaching daylight, no damage inflicted. The response from headquarters was professional but chilling, acknowledged. Continue patrol. The Dace spent the next 3 weeks searching for targets in her assigned area. On November 23, she located a tanker. Enright maneuvered into an attack position and prepared to fire, but Japanese escort ships appeared, forcing the Dace deep with a depth charge attack. The tanker escaped, no damage inflicted. The patrol concluded on December 11 when the Dace returned to Midway, having spent 49 days at sea. The tally: 0 confirmed sinkings, 1 damaged freighter, and 1 missed opportunity against the most significant carrier target in the Pacific theater. Enright understood the implications. His patrol report would be reviewed by Admiral Charles Lockwood, Commander Submarine Force Pacific. Lockwood was known for granting his submarine captains considerable tactical freedom, but also for relieving those who failed to sink ships. Enright did not await Lockwood's judgment. On December 12, Enright submitted a formal request: I was responsible for an unproductive patrol and request to be relieved by an officer who can perform more satisfactorily. The request reached Lockwood's desk on December 14. Lockwood granted it immediately. Enright was relieved of command of the Dace and assigned to administrative duties at the Midway submarine base. The Dace received a new commanding officer and, under his leadership, went on to sink multiple Japanese ships and earn a Presidential Unit citation. The submarine was successful. It seemed to everyone at Midway that Enright had been the problem. Enright spent 6 months processing patrol reports, coordinating logistics, and assigning repair schedules, desk work, paperwork, the kind of duty that ended submarine careers. Officers who failed in command rarely received second chances. The submarine force had more qualified commanders than available submarines, and failed commanders were typically transferred to surface ships or shore duty, their submarine days concluded. But Enright refused to accept this outcome. In June 1944, he requested a meeting with Admiral Lockwood. The meeting lasted 15 minutes. Enright argued that his failure on the Dace stemmed from excessive caution, rigidly adhering to doctrine rather than trusting his instincts. He asserted that he had learned from the failure and requested another submarine command. Lockwood listened, then reviewed Enright's record: Naval Academy class of 1933, upper third of his class, 3 years of service on the battleship Maryland, submarine qualification in 1936, 8 years of submarine experience before the war, commands of the USS O-10 and USS Dace. 0 sinkings, but also 0 major errors, save for the Shokaku incident. Lockwood made his decision: Enright would receive his second chance, but not immediately. Enright remained at Midway until September. Finally, in late August, Lockwood summoned him. USS Archerfish needs a new commanding officer. Her fourth patrol just ended with no sinkings. The crew is experienced but frustrated. They need a commander who will be aggressive. Can you be that commander? Enright's answer was an unequivocal yes. On September 1, 1944, Commander Joseph Enright assumed command of the USS Archerfish. On November 28, 1944, at 20:48 hours, the Archerfish was running on the surface 60 miles south of Tokyo Bay. Enright had been assigned lifeguard duty, positioned to rescue downbeat 29 bomber crews during raids on Tokyo. The raids had been cancelled that morning, leaving Enright free to hunt. The radar operator reported a contact, 2 ships, 12 miles away, bearing north, showing large radar returns. Enright ordered flank speed to intercept. At 2200 hours, lookouts visually spotted the contacts, 1 massive vessel with 3 destroyer escorts. The destroyers were running in close formation, and the large ship appeared to be a warship, possibly a battleship or a carrier. Enright's executive officer estimated the target's length at over 800 feet. Whatever it was the largest Japanese warship Enright had ever encountered. The destroyers complicated the approach, running anti-submarine patterns that forced the task group to zigzag at irregular intervals. Enright tracked the formation from 12,000 yards, observing and calculating its speed and heading. The Japanese ships were making 20 knots. The Archerfish could barely match 20 knots on the surface, meaning Enright could not overtake them on a straight course. He had to anticipate their zigzag pattern and cut the angle. The chase commenced in earnest at 21:30 hours. Enright ordered all 4 diesel engines to maximum output. The Archerfish's engines were rated for sustained operation at 1,600 horsepower per engine, but flank speed required pushing them to 1,800 horsepower. The chief engineer warned that sustained operation at this power level risked engine damage. Enright accepted the risk. Missing this target was not an option. The engine room crew meticulously monitored temperatures, pressures, and fuel consumption. The diesels roared, black smoke billowing from the exhaust ports. On the surface in darkness, the smoke was invisible to Japanese lookouts, but the sound carried across the water. Enright maintained the Archerfish at least 8,000 yards behind the Japanese formation, close enough to track, yet far enough to avoid detection. The Japanese ships maintained their zigzag pattern, turning 30 degrees left or right every 12 minutes. Enright timed these intervals precisely, 12 minutes between turns, 30-degree angle. The pattern was consistent, predictable. Enright used this information to calculate his intercept course. If the Japanese maintained this pattern, they would zigzag within 5,000 yards of the Archerfish's position at approximately 0:30 hours. This would place Enright ahead of the formation, in position to submerge and execute a classic ambush attack, but only if the Japanese maintained their pattern. Any deviation would ruin the geometry. At 22:30 hours, Enright was 10,000 yards behind the Japanese formation. The gap was closing slowly, with the Archerfish making 20.3 knots to the Japanese formation's 20.0 knots, a mere 3/10 of a knot advantage. At this rate, Enright would be in position in 3 hours. At 2300 hours, the Japanese formation turned back toward the northwest. This turn brought them closer to the Archerfish, decreasing the range to 7,000 yards. Enright's sonar operator detected propeller sounds, indicating the Japanese ships were close enough for acoustic detection. Enright ordered his crew to remain silent, no unnecessary movement, no loud conversation, as sound traveled through water far better than through air. A careless noise could alert Japanese sonar operators. At 23:30 hours, Enright recalculated his intercept solution. The Japanese zigzag pattern had subtly changed, turns were still every 12 minutes, but the angle had decreased to 25 degrees. This smaller angle meant the formation was covering more distance in each leg of the zigzag. Enright adjusted his course to compensate. At midnight, Enright was 6,000 yards behind the formation, still closing, but slowly. The chief engineer reported engine temperatures nearing maximum safe limits. Enright ordered a brief reduction to 1,700 horsepower to allow the engines to cool. The Archerfish's speed dropped to 19.5 knots. As the Japanese formation maintained 20 knots, the gap began to widen. Enright watched the radar screen, 7,000 yards, then 8,000 yards. He was losing ground. At 0:30 hours, Enright ordered power back to 1800 horsepower. The engines responded, and the Archerfish accelerated back to 20.3 knots. The gap stabilized at 8,000 yards, then began to close again, 7,000 yards. At 1 o'clock hours, the Japanese formation executed another turn. This time, they turned southwest, directly away from the Archerfish. The geometry worsened. Enright was now chasing them directly astern, the worst possible position for an intercept. The Japanese ships could maintain this course indefinitely, and the Archerfish would never close the distance. Enright considered his options. He could break off and search for other targets, radio headquarters for support from other submarines, or continue the chase, hoping for another zigzag that would improve the geometry. Enright decided to continue. This target was too valuable to abandon. If this was a carrier, and Enright believed it was, sinking it would justify every risk. At 1:30 hours, the Japanese formation maintained their southwest course. Enright paralleled them at 8,000 yards. His fuel state was becoming a concern, running at flank speed consumed fuel at 3 times the normal rate. The Archerfish had enough fuel for another 6 hours at this speed before needing to reduce power to conserve reserves for the return voyage to base. 6 hours. Enright checked his watch. It was 1:35 hours. By 7:30 hours, he would have to break off the chase or risk running out of fuel before reaching friendly waters. At 2 o'clock hours, the Japanese formation zigzagged again, turning northwest, back toward their original course. The geometry improved instantly. Enright was now 7,000 yards behind and slightly to port of the formation. If they maintained this course for another 30 minutes, Enright would be ahead of them. At 2:30 hours, Enright recalculated his position. He was 6,000 yards behind the formation, but more importantly, he was ahead of their baseline course. If the Japanese zigzagged southwest again, they would pass within 5,000 yards of the Archerfish. It was time to prepare for a submerged attack. Enright briefed his officers, when the Japanese turn southwest, we submerge. We position ourselves across their track. We wait for them to close range. We fire all 6 bow tubes, 1 spread, all torpedoes. This target is too big to waste shots on multiple attacks. We fire everything, dive deep, evade. Understood, the officers confirmed. This was the moment Enright had been training for since taking command of the Archerfish 2 months earlier. At 2:56 hours, the Japanese formation turned southwest. The geometry was perfect. Enright ordered, dive. The Archerfish slipped beneath the surface smoothly, quietly, ballast tanks flooding. The submarine descended to periscope depth. 60 feet below the surface, Enright raised the periscope and scanned the area. The Japanese formation was 7,000 yards away, closing at 20 knots. Time to contact, approximately 17 minutes. Enright lowered the periscope. There was no point keeping it raised, periscope wakes could be spotted by alert lookouts. Better to stay hidden until the last possible moment. The crew rigged for silent running. All unnecessary equipment was shut down, ventilation fans off. Machinery that made noise was isolated. The only sounds were the quiet hum of electric motors and the breathing of 81 men. At 3 o'clock hours, Enright raised the periscope for a quick look. The target was 5,000 yards away. The massive ship was clearly visible now, flight deck, island superstructure. A carrier. Definitely a carrier. Enright could see aircraft on the deck, or what appeared to be aircraft. These were, in fact, Oka rocket bombs, but Enright had no way to identify them at this distance. He made quick sketches, noting every detail, length, beam, superstructure configuration. These details would be crucial for intelligence analysis after the patrol. Enright lowered the periscope. The Japanese ships had turned southwest at 22:30 hours. Enright ordered a course change to intercept. The task group turned back northwest at 2300 hours. Enright adjusted again. This was not blind luck, this was mathematics, speed, bearing, interval between turns. Enright tracked the pattern for 3 hours. At 1:30 hours, he had calculated the zigzag intervals. The Japanese commander was turning every 12 minutes, alternating 30 degrees left and right from the base course. Predictable. Fatal. At 2 o'clock hours, Enright was 8,000 yards behind the Japanese formation. Still too far for a submerged attack. He needed to get ahead of them, to position the Archerfish across their path so he could submerge and fire from ambush. Surfaced attacks against destroyer escorts were suicide. Enright kept the Archerfish on the surface, running at flank speed, engines straining, diesel smoke trailing into the darkness. The Japanese lookouts never saw him, they were watching for submarines ahead of their formation, not behind. Enright was pursuing them from astern, a tactic submariners called an end around. If the Japanese maintained course, Enright would never catch them, but if they zigged at the wrong moment, they would turn directly into his path. At 2:56 hours, the Japanese formation turned southwest, straight toward the Archerfish. Enright had cut the angle. He was now 5,000 yards ahead of the task group. Time to submerge. Enright ordered dive, and the Archerfish slipped beneath the surface. Silent running, all non-essential equipment shut down. The Japanese destroyers had sonar. One active ping would reveal the Archerfish's position. The crew moved through the submarine on rubber-soled shoes. Every man knew his job, every action was deliberate, quiet, precise. Enright raised the periscope and studied the approaching warship through the eyepiece. The target was huge, far larger than any carrier he had seen in recognition manuals: flight deck, island superstructure, massive hull. This was definitely an aircraft carrier. Unknown class, unknown identity. Enright made sketches on a notepad. He would need these for the patrol report, as intelligence would want details. At 3:04 hours, Enright realized the carrier was going to pass north of the Archerfish, the wrong position. He needed the carrier to expose her broadside. A bow or stern shot against a target this large would require a perfect angle and perfect luck. Enright did not believe in luck, he believed in geometry. At 3:12 hours, the carrier turned south, a course change of 30 degrees. The zigzag pattern continued, but this turn put the carrier on a collision course with the Archerfish. The geometry was perfect. Enright ordered, final approach. The Archerfish crept forward at 2 knots. Range closed, 2,000 yards, 1,500 yards, 1,200 yards. The destroyers were spread in a screen 300 yards ahead of the carrier. If the Archerfish got any closer, the destroyers would detect her. Enright had to fire now. 1,400 yards. Enright marked his firing solution. All 6 forward torpedo tubes were ready. He set the torpedoes to run at 10 feet depth. Shallow. The carrier's draft would be at least 30 feet. Standard doctrine was to aim torpedoes at 15 to 20 feet depth to explode beneath the waterline. Enright ignored doctrine. A carrier this large would have anti-torpedo bulges below the waterline, armored compartments designed to absorb explosions. Enright wanted his torpedoes to hit higher, above the bulges, where the hull plating was thinner. If the torpedoes ran deeper than set, they would still hit below the waterline. If they ran true, they would punch holes in the carrier's side 10 feet below the surface. Either way, she would flood. Enright called out the firing sequence: Tube 1, fire. 8-second interval. Tube 2, fire. 8 seconds. Tube 3, fire. 8 seconds. Tube 4, fire. 5. 6. Fire. 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 6 torpedoes running hot, straight, and normal. Enright kept his eye pressed to the periscope. He watched the first torpedo track close the distance. 45 seconds to impact. The torpedo ran true, no deviation, no porpoising. It struck the carrier's starboard side amidships at 3:17 hours. A massive fireball erupted from the point of impact. The explosion sound traveled through the water, a deep, booming crack that reverberated through the Archerfish's hull. Enright saw the second torpedo hit 8 seconds later, another fireball, another explosion. The crew cheered. Enright kept watching. Torpedo 3 hit near the stern. Torpedo 4 hit forward of amidships. 4 hits confirmed. Torpedoes 5 and 6 either ran under the carrier or missed wide. Enright did not see them detonate. He had no time to confirm. The destroyers were turning toward the Archerfish. They had pinpointed the torpedo wakes, calculated the launch point. Depth charges were coming. Enright ordered, dive to 400 feet. The Archerfish dropped like a stone, venting ballast, flooding tanks, descending fast. 400 feet was close to crush depth for a Balao-class submarine. The Archerfish was rated for a test depth of 312 feet, operational maximum 400 feet. Below that, the pressure hull would fail. Enright gambled that the Japanese depth charges were set for shallower detonation. At 400 feet, at 3:23 hours, the crew rigged for silent running. No talking, no movement, no machinery except essential systems. They waited in darkness, listening. The first depth charge detonated at 3:26 hours. The explosion was distant, at least 500 yards away. The destroyers were attacking where the Archerfish should have been, not where she was. 13 more depth charges followed over the next 12 minutes. None came close. The Japanese destroyers were guessing, dropping charges in a pattern that covered the area where the torpedo tracks originated. But the Archerfish had moved 400 yards south and gone deep. The geometry saved them again. At 3:47 hours, the depth charge attack stopped. The destroyers had lost contact. Enright kept the Archerfish at 400 feet for another hour. He listened through the hydrophones, monitoring the sounds of the surface battle. The carrier's engines had stopped. He could hear breaking up noises, loud metallic groaning and cracking, bulkheads collapsing, compartments flooding. The carrier was dying. The breaking up noises continued for 47 minutes. Enright's sonar operator timed them precisely, 47 minutes of destruction sounds, then silence. Enright assumed the carrier had sunk. He recorded the time as 4:34 hours. He was wrong. The carrier was still afloat. But Enright was right. Enright had no way to know this. Submarines running at 400 feet cannot see surface vessels. Enright had to rely on sound, and the sounds told him the carrier was finished. At 5 o'clock hours, Enright brought the Archerfish to periscope depth. Cautiously, the destroyers might still be hunting. He raised the scope for 3 seconds, a quick 360-degree sweep. No contacts. No destroyers. No carrier wreckage. Empty ocean. Enright lowered the scope and descended back to 200 feet. He set course south, away from Tokyo Bay. The Archerfish had survived. Whether the carrier had sunk or remained afloat, Enright would not know until the patrol report was filed and naval intelligence assessed the attack. He estimated his target as a Hayataka-class carrier, approximately 28,000 tons. He was wrong. The carrier displaced 72,000 tons, and at 5 o'clock hours when Enright checked his periscope, she was still steaming south at 18 knots with 4 torpedo holes flooding her hull. The Japanese called her Shinano. The name meant, the longest river in Japan, a designation reserved for capital ships of strategic importance. Shinano had been laid down as a battleship, the third of the Yamato-class. Construction began in May 1940 at Yokosuka Naval Arsenal. The Yamato-class battleships were the most powerful warships in the fleet. Of 5 planned Yamato-class battleships, only 2, Yamato and Musashi, were completed as battleships. The third hull, designated hull number 110, sat incomplete at Yokosuka when the Battle of Midway concluded on June 7, 1942. Japan lost 4 fleet carriers at Midway, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, all sunk in one day. The Imperial Japanese Navy faced a carrier shortage it could not quickly replace. Construction of fleet carriers took a minimum of 3 years, time Japan did not have. The Americans were building carriers faster than Japan could sink them. Naval architects proposed converting Hull 110 from a battleship to an aircraft carrier. The conversion would take 2 years, but it was faster than building a new carrier from scratch. The proposal was approved in June 1942. Shinano's battleship hull was partially complete, with the armor belt installed and lower decks framed. The conversion required removing the battleship's superstructure and replacing it with a flight deck and hangar bays. The armor belt remained, as did the hull structure. Shinano would be a carrier built on a battleship's foundation, combining the striking power of a carrier with the survivability of a battleship. At least, that was the theory. Construction continued through 1943 and into 1944, conducted in absolute secrecy. American reconnaissance flights over Tokyo Bay regularly photographed the Yokosuka yard, but Shinano's construction slip was covered with camouflage netting. American naval intelligence knew Japan was building something large at Yokosuka, but they did not know what. On November 1, 1944, a B-29 bomber on reconnaissance photographed Shinano during sea trials. The photographs showed a carrier, but American analysts could not identify the class. The silhouette matched no known Japanese carrier. Naval intelligence added the ship to their list of unidentified targets, but they had no idea of its size or capabilities. Shinano was commissioned on November 19, 1944, with Captain Toshio Abe commanding. The ceremony was brief. The ship was not ready for combat operations. Watertight doors were not installed, and pumps were missing in critical compartments. The crew was inexperienced, most had never served on a carrier. Abe requested 2 more months to complete fitting out and train his crew. He was denied. American B-29 bombers were striking Tokyo with increasing frequency. Shinano was vulnerable at Yokosuka. The carrier needed to be moved to Kure Naval Base in the Inland Sea, where she could complete fitting out under better protection. The voyage from Yokosuka to Kure was 300 miles, approximately 17 hours at cruising speed. Abe wanted to wait for better weather and a larger destroyer escort. He was ordered to depart immediately with whatever escort was available. 3 destroyers were assigned, Isokais, Yukikais, and Hamakais. Good ships, experienced crews, but not enough. A carrier the size of Shinano required at least 6 destroyer escorts for adequate protection. 3 was barely sufficient. Abe protested, but he was overruled. Shinano departed Yokosuka at 13:30 hours on November 28, 1944, with Captain Toshio Abe commanding. The task group cleared Tokyo Bay approaches at 18:30 hours and set course southwest for Kure Naval Base in the Inland Sea, 9 days after commissioning. The carrier's cargo hold contained 50 Yokosuka MXY-7 Oka rocket-powered bombs, kamikaze weapons destined for bases in Kyushu. 6 Shinyo suicide boats were also on board. The hangar bays were empty. Shinano carried no operational aircraft. She was a ferry, not a fighting ship, not yet. The task group steamed south at 20 knots. Abe ordered a standard anti-submarine zigzag pattern, 30-degree turns every 12 minutes. American submarines were active in this area. Abe's intelligence briefing listed 3 confirmed submarine contacts in the past week. One of those contacts was the Archerfish. Abe did not know the submarine's designation, but he knew it was out there. At 20:48 hours, Shinano's radar detected a surface contact 12 miles south. Abe assumed it was an American submarine. He ordered a course change to avoid the contact. The task group turned southwest. The radar contact paralleled their course. Abe ordered a speed increase to 22 knots. The radar contact maintained distance but did not close. Abe studied the situation. If this was a submarine, it was tracking Shinano, radioing position reports to other submarines in the area. Abe believed he was facing an American wolf pack, multiple submarines coordinating their attack. Standard doctrine was to evade, to outrun the submarines and clear the area before they could establish an attack position. Abe had a 2-knot speed advantage. He could outrun any American submarine on the surface. He ordered flank speed, but the order was countermanded by engineering. The starboard-outboard propeller shaft bearing was overheating. Running at flank speed risked damaging the shaft. Engineering recommended reducing speed to 18 knots until the bearing cooled. Abe had no choice. At 23:22 hours, Shinano reduced speed to 18 knots, the same speed the Archerfish could make on the surface. Enright was no longer falling behind, he was keeping pace. Abe's executive officer recommended launching aircraft to search for submarines. Shinano carried no operational aircraft, the hangar bays were empty except for cargo. Abe's operations officer recommended illuminating the area with searchlights to force any submarines on the surface to dive. Abe refused. Such lights would reveal Shinano's position to every submarine within 20 miles. The operations officer recommended requesting air cover from land-based naval aircraft. Abe refused. Radio transmissions would reveal Shinano's position to American codebreakers. Abe was trying to slip past the submarines through stealth and speed. He did not realize that stealth was already compromised and speed was no longer an option. At 2:56 hours, Shinano turned southwest. This turn placed the Archerfish 5,000 yards directly ahead of Shinano's projected course. Abe's lookout spotted nothing. The Archerfish had submerged. At 3:15 hours, 4 torpedoes struck Shinano's starboard side. The first torpedo hit near the stern, flooding the refrigerated storage compartments and one empty aviation gasoline tank. Engineering personnel sleeping in the compartments above were killed instantly. The bulkheads separating the flooded compartments from adjacent spaces held initially, but they were not designed to withstand sustained pressure. The second torpedo hit the starboard outboard propeller shaft, the same shaft that had been overheating. The shaft tunnel flooded immediately, and the outboard engine room flooded within 3 minutes. The third torpedo hit boiler room number 3. Every man on watch was killed. The boiler room flooded completely within 2 minutes. Structural failures caused the 2 adjacent boiler rooms to flood as well. 3 boiler rooms lost, half of Shinano's power generation gone. The fourth torpedo hit the starboard air compressor room. The explosion destroyed the compressed air systems that powered damage control equipment. Magazines for anti-aircraft guns adjacent to the compressor room flooded. The damage control teams responded immediately. They closed watertight doors, activated pumps, and attempted to contain the flooding. But the watertight doors were unfinished, gaps remained between the door and the bulkheads. Water poured through the gaps. The pumps were insufficient. Shinano's designers had planned to install additional pumps, but the pumps had not arrived before the ship departed Yokosuka. Damage control teams used portable pumps, bucket brigades, anything available. It was not enough. Abe assessed the damage at 3:30 hours, 4 compartments flooded, 3 boiler rooms lost, multiple leaks through incomplete watertight doors. Shinano was taking on water faster than the pumps could remove it. The carrier was listing 7 degrees to starboard. Abe had 3 options. He could order counterflooding to correct the list, reduce speed and focus all efforts on damage control, or attempt to beach Shinano on the nearest coast, approximately 60 miles distant. Abe chose none of these options. He ordered Shinano to maintain maximum speed toward the nearest Japanese naval base. He believed speed would reduce the time available for additional submarine attacks. He believed the carrier could survive long enough to reach port. He was wrong. Maintaining speed increased water pressure against the damaged hull. The incomplete watertight doors could not hold. Water flooded through the gaps into undamaged compartments. The list increased to 10 degrees by 4 o'clock hours, 14 degrees by 5 o'clock hours. The engineering officer reported to Abe at 5:30 hours, the flooding could not be contained, the pumps were losing. Shinano would sink unless immediate action was taken. Abe ordered counterflooding. Too late. The list had already exceeded the angle where counterflooding would be effective. The engineering officer recommended reducing speed to allow damage control teams time to shore up bulkheads and seal the leaks. Abe agreed. At 6 o'clock hours, Shinano reduced speed to 12 knots. The list stabilized at 14 degrees. The damage control teams worked through the compartments, sealing leaks, reinforcing bulkheads, activating every available pump, but the design flaws were fatal. Post-war analysis by American naval engineers determined that Shinano had serious structural weaknesses. The joint between the waterline armor belt and the underwater anti-torpedo bulge was poorly designed. Enright's torpedoes had struck along this joint. The force of the explosions had dislodged an I-beam in one of the flooded boiler rooms. The I-beam punched a hole into an adjacent boiler room, creating an additional leak that could not be sealed. The executive officer reported to Abe at 7 o'clock hours, the carrier was doomed. The list was increasing despite all efforts. Abe refused to accept this assessment. He ordered all non-essential personnel to assemble on the port side of the flight deck. The weight of 1,200 men might counterbalance the list. It did not. By 8 o'clock hours, the list had reached 18 degrees. Water was flooding into spaces that had been dry 2 hours earlier. The carrier's speed had dropped to 6 knots. The destroyers remained in formation, ready to pick up survivors if Shinano sank. But Abe still believed the carrier could be saved. At 9 o'clock hours, the list reached 25 degrees. Personnel on the lower decks could no longer stand upright. Equipment broke loose and slid into the starboard bulkheads. Abe finally acknowledged reality. He ordered all non-essential personnel to abandon ship. 1,200 sailors and civilian workers moved to the flight deck. The destroyers closed alongside to take on survivors, but the carrier's list made transfer difficult. Rope ladders were rigged from the flight deck to the destroyer decks. Men climbed down slowly, carefully. The transfer took 90 minutes. At 10:30 hours, Shinano's list reached 40 degrees. The carrier was rolling onto her side. Abe ordered all remaining personnel to abandon ship. 800 men were still aboard. They jumped from the flight deck into the water. The destroyers moved in to pick them up. At 10:57 hours, Shinano capsized and sank. Final position, 33 degrees 45 minutes north, 137 degrees 4 minutes east, approximately 65 miles southeast of Cape Shirono. 1,435 men died, 1,080 were rescued. Captain Abe went down with his ship. Shinano had been commissioned for 10 days. She had steamed approximately 170 miles from Yokosuka. She never launched a single aircraft in combat. She never fired her guns at an enemy. 4 torpedoes from one American submarine ended the largest warship ever built. Enright knew none of this. The Archerfish continued south, clearing the area at standard speed. Enright surfaced at 8 o'clock hours and transmitted a contact report to Pacific Fleet Headquarters. Enemy carrier attacked at 3:17 hours. 4 torpedo hits observed. Target believed sunk. Position 34 degrees north, 138 degrees east. Enright estimated the carrier at 28,000 tons based on his periscope observations. He had no reference for a carrier as large as Shinano. Nothing in the recognition manuals matched what he had seen. Pacific Fleet acknowledged the report, reviewed Enright's sketches, and compared them to known Japanese carrier classes. No match. They assumed Enright had sunk a merchant conversion carrier, possibly a tanker hull converted to carry aircraft. 28,000 tons seemed reasonable for such a vessel. Enright was credited with sinking a Hayataka-class carrier, pending post-war confirmation. The Archerfish continued her patrol for another 2 weeks. She encountered no additional targets of significance. On December 8, she attacked 2 Japanese escort vessels with 4 torpedoes. No hits were obtained. On December 15, the Archerfish ended her 5th war patrol at Guam. 48 days at sea, 1 carrier sunk. Enright filed his patrol report and submitted his sketches to Naval Intelligence. The analysts remained skeptical. A carrier that large would have been detected by reconnaissance flights. American photo interpreters had catalogued every Japanese carrier afloat, none matched Enright's description. Enright's executive officer supported the claim. Lookout supported the claim. The sonarman supported the claim. 47 minutes of breaking up noises confirmed the target had sustained catastrophic damage. But without photographic evidence or prisoner confirmation, Naval Intelligence could not verify the sinking. Enright was credited with a carrier, type unknown, tonnage estimated at 28,000. He received the Navy Cross. The Archerfish received a Presidential Unit Citation. The citation read, "For extraordinary heroism in action during the 5th War Patrol against enemy Japanese combatant units in restricted waters of the Pacific, relentless in tracking an alert and powerful hostile force which constituted a potential threat to our vital operations in the Philippine area, the Archerfish culminated a dogged 6.5 hour pursuit by closing her high-speed target, daringly penetrating the strong destroyer escort screen, and struck fiercely at a large Japanese aircraft carrier, with all 6 of her torpedoes finding their mark to sink this extremely vital enemy ship. The citation was accurate in every detail except one: only 4 torpedoes had found their mark, 6 had been fired. The Navy did not correct the citation. Close enough. Enright returned to sea in January 1945 for the Archerfish's 6th War Patrol. The submarine operated as part of a wolf pack in the South China Sea. Enright commanded the group. On February 14, the Archerfish attacked what Enright believed was a Japanese submarine. The target submerged before visual confirmation. Enright fired torpedoes and claimed a kill. Post-war records could not confirm the sinking. The 6th patrol ended on March 3, 3 days early. The Archerfish experienced mechanical problems with her forward diving planes. She returned to Pearl Harbor for repairs. Enright was promoted to commander and reassigned to staff duties. His time as a submarine captain was finished. The Archerfish continued operations under a new commander. She survived the war and was decommissioned in June 1946. She was recommissioned in March 1952 for Cold War service, then decommissioned again in October 1955. She was recommissioned a second time in August 1957 and reclassified as an auxiliary submarine. Her final decommissioning came in May 1968. On October 19, 1968, the Archerfish was sunk as a target by the USS Snook off the coast of California. The submarine that sank the largest warship in history was now target practice. Enright's career continued after the war. He commanded Submarine Division 31, the USS Fulton, and Submarine Squadron 8 through the 1950s. He served as Chief of Staff for the Submarine Force of the United States Atlantic Fleet and commanded the USS Boston before retiring from the U.S. Navy in 1963 with the rank of captain. After retirement, Enright worked for Northrop Corporation on the Omega navigation system. He lived quietly in Fairfax, Virginia, not speaking publicly about Shinano during the immediate post-war years. The Navy had not confirmed the identity of the carrier he sank. The official record listed his achievement as sinking a 28,000-ton carrier, type unknown. That changed in 1949 when American occupation forces in Japan gained access to Imperial Japanese Navy records. The records documented every warship commissioned by Japan during the war. One entry stood out: Shinano, aircraft carrier, hull 110, commissioned November 19, 1944, sunk November 29, 1944, position 33 degrees 45 minutes north, 137 degrees 4 minutes east. Cause: torpedo attack by American submarine. Displacement: 72,000 long tons. The position matched Enright's attack coordinates. The date matched. The cause matched. Enright had not sunk a 28,000-ton carrier, he had sunk a 72,000-ton supercarrier, the largest warship afloat at the time. Naval Intelligence revised Enright's combat record. The carrier designation changed from Hayataka-class to Shinano. The tonnage estimate changed from 28,000 to 72,000. Enright's achievement became official: he had sunk the largest warship ever destroyed by a submarine. The record stands today, 80 years later. No submarine has sunk a larger warship. Enright's Navy Cross citation was not amended, the original citation remained in his file. But the achievement was recognized by naval historians and submarine veterans. Enright had accomplished what no other submarine commander had achieved before or since. In 1987, as the United States was in the process of establishing a new submarine, Enright published a memoir. The book was titled Shinano, The Sinking of Japan's Secret Supership. Enright wrote the book with assistance from naval historian Robert Underbrink. The book documented the patrol in detail, including transcripts from the Archerfish's patrol report, interviews with surviving crew members, and analysis of Japanese records captured after the war. Enright described the moment he saw the first torpedo hit: "I saw a huge fireball erupt near the stern of the target. Then we heard the noise of the first hit carried to us through the water. Got them!" I yelled. As I continued to peer into the periscope, I saw the second explosion rip the target's hull 8 seconds later. Yahoo! I cried to myself. The book became required reading at the Naval Submarine School in Groton. Submarine officers studied Enright's tactics, his patience during the 6-hour surface chase, his decision to fire shallow-running torpedoes, his dive to 400 feet to evade depth charges. The patrol was textbook perfect, aggressive tracking, calculated risk, disciplined execution. Enright's redemption was complete. The officer who had requested relief from command after failing to sink Shokaku had destroyed the largest warship in the world, 11 months later. The failure on the Dace had taught him lessons: do not hesitate, trust your instincts, do not follow doctrine when doctrine does not fit the situation. Enright applied those lessons on the Archerfish. The shallow-running torpedoes violated standard procedure, but they worked. The dive to 400 feet risked crushing the submarine, but it saved them. Enright died on July 20, 2000, at his home in Fairfax, Virginia, at 89 years old. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. Submarine veterans from across the country attended the funeral. The eulogy noted his service, his achievements, his redemption. Joseph Francis Enright, graduate of the United States Naval Academy, class of 1933, submarine officer for 27 years, commander of USS Archerfish during the patrol that sank the Japanese aircraft carrier Shinano, the largest warship ever sunk by a submarine. Enright's widow donated his Navy Cross and Presidential Unit Citation to the Naval Submarine Museum in Groton. The medals are displayed alongside Archerfish's battle flag, photographs from the 5th War Patrol, and Enright's sketches of Shinano. This is the patrol that proved a submarine captain who had failed once could succeed when given a second chance. This is the patrol that demonstrated patience and calculation could defeat size and armor. Shinano remains on the ocean floor 65 miles southeast of Cape Shirano. Japanese maritime law prohibits diving on war graves. Sonar scans conducted by a Japanese research vessel in 1978 confirmed the wreck's position in approximately 4,000 meters of water. The hull is intact but inverted, with the flight deck resting on the seabed. 1,435 men are entombed inside. The 3 destroyer escorts that picked up survivors, Isokais, Yukikais, and Hamakais, had different fates. Isokais was sunk by American carrier aircraft on April 7, 1945, during the Battle of Okinawa. Hamakais was sunk the same day, in the same battle. Yukikais survived the war and was transferred to the Republic of China Navy as war reparations. She served until 1966 and was scrapped in 1969, the last witness to Shinano's sinking. The Archerfish's crew remained in contact after the war, holding reunions every 5 years. Enright attended every reunion until his death in 2000. By 2010, most of the crew had died. The last surviving crew member from the 5th War Patrol passed away in 2015. The story survives through written records, through Enright's memoir, through the patrol report filed in December 1944. The USS Archerfish Association continues to maintain the submarine's history. They preserve documents, photographs, and artifacts. They conduct outreach to schools and museums. They ensure that younger generations understand what happened on November 29, 1944, a submarine crew of 81 men tracked a Japanese task force for 6 hours, maneuvered into attack position, fired 6 torpedoes, and sank the largest warship ever built. The action took less than 1 minute. The consequences lasted 72 years. Shinano was Japan's last hope for carrier superiority in the Pacific. Her loss removed any possibility of challenging American carrier task forces. Japan's carrier fleet was finished. The kamikaze campaign would continue, but without carrier support. The outcome of the war was no longer in question: Japan would lose. The question was only how long the fighting would last. Shinano's sinking did not end the war, but it shortened the war. Every day the war continued, thousands died. Every week the war continued, cities burned. Shortening the war by even 1 week saved thousands of lives. Enright's patrol on the Archerfish contributed to that outcome. Not directly, not dramatically, but measurably. 1 submarine, 6 torpedoes, a week for the world. This is one of the many stories about submariners who changed history with skill and courage. Real boats, real men, real consequences.